So when you become the C-level person, you realize, oh, I kind of work for all these people. I can't be successful unless like they're all happy and I'm doing what they want me to do.
Like moving a big organization is a lot like moving, like if you've ever made a snowman and you have that really, really big snowball at the bottom, right? You can't just shove it really hard in one place because it's going to break apart.
There's no way anybody knows how time savings are translated into improved productivity unless you start firing people.
How did you end up building those relationships with the rest of the executive team in a way that was effective?
You earn a lot of credibility if you will just go out into the business and watch what's going on.
One of the things I think IT leaders will run into in that case is that like selling better is hard. You know, just to get started, like level set, I'm super curious. You've had this like sort of long and illustrious career kind of going through a lot of different roles from, entry to CIO. I'm super curious. One, how did you get into IT in the first place? What was the first thing that you ended up doing? And then I'm also really interested when you made the transition from sort of like, VP or something to CIO, like how did that transition happen?
Few people know it, but actually my formal training is in geology. So I hold advanced degrees in geology. And I went to work for Arco Oil and Gas. Arco was a huge company. They were bought by British Petroleum many years ago. And I was at their research lab in Plano. And what I rapidly discovered was, people think geologists walk around, in the mountains with a hammer and a backpack and like they're chipping rocks away and doing stuff like that. But as you might suspect, it is a really high-tech industry, like a super high-tech industry. And yeah, we had this little research team and we were doing a lot of different interesting things that all required, the use of computers. We actually at the time had 2 Cray computers at the lab, and we were processing seismic data from Prudhoe Bay and doing all kinds of, wild and crazy things. And so I have frequently referred to that as kind of getting my master's degree in IT when I was there at the research lab. So,
As you kind of went through your career, the first, like one of the things that I'm interested in, and in your books you allude to this a tremendous amount, is this sort of like when you get into IT leadership, the role changes pretty dramatically. Like you start thinking about things like constituencies and how to sell projects and this kind of stuff. The first time that you stepped into that class of a leadership role, like, was it shocking? Was it sort of a bracing, burst of cold air kind of a thing? Or did you kind of naturally adapt?
Both. So 2 things can be true at the same time. And, so what I hate to kind of say this because it sounds so hackney, but what you really discover when you take any C-level job, I think, is the politics of the company become something you just have to manage on a daily basis. And I thought about this a little bit. If you're in an IT organization and you're a VP or a director, your chain of command is pretty well understood. And you may be working with people in the business and they may be providing feedback on your performance, et cetera. But at the end of the day, like you work for the CIO. And even if you have some unhappy business partners, right, you could be running the data warehouse. And I know that nobody could run a data warehouse better than you. If I'm hearing a little bit of noise coming from the business, I think to myself, they don't know how good they've got it, because if Matt leaves tomorrow morning, we're kind of up the creek. So when you become the C-level person, you realize, oh, I kind of work for all these people. I can't be successful unless like they're all happy and I'm doing what they want me to do. And even the people that I formally report to, the CEO and the CFO, are going to instinctively look at all of my peers and constantly get feedback on both my performance and, as part of my performance, really the impact and effectiveness of the IT organization. So, call it politics. Sometimes company politics has kind of a bad connotation, but you just find yourself managing things that you didn't have to deal with, or to an extent that you've never done before. I also kid. I think a lot of people at the beginning part of their technical careers, they think that people who are in charge have incredible license to independently take action on their own. And, I go up to the mountain and I can commune with the oracle, and I decide that RPA technology will transform the revenue and profitability of our company. And I come down from the summit and, I try to convert all the great unwashed about how we're going to take up a whole new crusade, right?
Strategy from whole cloth, just
Exactly.
head out fully clad in armor. Exactly. Right. Yeah.
Nothing could be further from the truth. So, yeah, so it's not, people talk about technical leadership or innovation. I mean, in point of fact, you really can't do anything that has a business impact from an IT perspective unless you've got a business partner that you're working with that's actually going to change the way operations are performed outside of IT.
Well, I'm curious, and like just diving into that for a second, this is one of the things I'm super fascinated about is the kinds of skills that you need to develop to build sort of partnerships through that constituency of like, hey, so now I'm laterally connected to a group of people who my success is just intimately related to theirs, versus the more hierarchical version that you were saying, with a more standard like a VP role kind of thing. Like, were there particular skills that you had to get better at? Did you have an approach? Did you go around and just like do like a listening tour? Like, how did you end up building those relationships with the rest of the executive team in a way that was effective? Because I gotta be honest with you, it sounds like a weird thing, but I think that's one of those soft skills that a lot of folks miss, and then they end up, kind of at the top end, sort of like banging into a ceiling that they can't perceive because they don't have those skills. How did you approach it? How did you end up getting those skills?
I learned this over time. I wouldn't say that I came up with this during my first couple of experiences, but you earn a lot of credibility if you will just go out into the business and watch what's going on. Like, I say participate. Like, you're not going to get a sales quota and, be sent out into the field to try to like sell the product, or they're not going to ask you to go to the warehouse and, pick product for like 3 months or something like that. But I think everybody that goes into one of these roles, you go through the protocol of, meeting all the different people on the executive team. Hopefully, the thing you'll learn is you want to meet most of them during the interview process. Even if
Yeah.
somebody's right, see if somebody says, I don't care, go pick the CIO you want. It doesn't really affect me. I'm busy. I'm a busy person. Well, if you allow that to happen, then when you show up after you've been hired, that individual, let's say it's the head of sales, you walk in, sit at their desk, and she thinks, I didn't have anything to do with this. I mean, I didn't get in the middle of it and say no, but like, I don't take any responsibility for having brought you in, like, whatsoever. We're starting with a completely cold slate. And even if I had had a courtesy interview with the same woman before the job offer, implicitly, she did not put up a red flag and say, I got concerns about this person. So there's this like subliminal buy-in that, yeah, Mark is the guy. Like, oh, let's bring him in. So you at least got that place to start. And then once you get on the job, you will go around and, you'll have like your morning coffees and afternoon teas and the get to know you sessions and all that kind of stuff, which is all fine. But you really kind of earn your credibility if you get out of the conference rooms with the IT staff who are constantly whining about all of their problems and how the business just won't do what they want the business to do and how the business people have a bad attitude when it comes to technology. So all that, they actually, I talk about this in one of the books. Your own team can poison your mind about the business, right? Like, like you don't even go in with a even-handed perspective about what could happen. Like you go in thinking, these guys I can't work with this department. They hate us, or they have no interest in IT. But getting out in the field and actually going to their quarterly review meetings, touring their facilities, just try to see the world, from their perspective and what the challenges are that they're actually facing. So there's a couple of ways to look at this. Even if you don't learn anything, the very fact that you took your time, your precious time, and made the effort, you kind of get a brownie point for it. And in matter of fact, here's an interesting observation. Most of the time that I've done that, I should say many of the times that I've done this, when I just make the request of like, I'll come out with, let me go to your QSR in Minneapolis, your quarterly sales review in Minneapolis, right? Sometimes the first time you ask that for permission or for an invitation, they look at you like, why would you ever want to do that? Like, why? I don't really understand. So my point is, you may learn a lot, even if you don't learn anything. Let's say, you've done the IT job for 10 times and there's not a lot of new stuff for you to discover. You will still get an incredible amount of credibility from not just the executive, but from, the key members of their team, et cetera. And yeah, so that's important. And I think a third high leverage point, in many cases, in every major functional department, every leader has typically one or two lieutenants who are the real perception shapers in that organization from the C-level executive's point of view. And, I mean, VP's like a little love from a C-level official. And, if you can find the time to try out ideas on them, get some feedback from them about what they're seeing going wrong, or like what they think the big concern is, or where we could have the biggest impact, etc. If you just take the time to listen to them, and again, get a little credibility, you've invested the effort to at least get their perspective, right? I mean, so you have to worm your way into their confidence. That's kind of the long-winded answer to that question, I guess.
No, it makes a ton of sense. And actually, I've talked to people about this before. It's really difficult to sort of understand that you do not, like, moving a big organization is a lot like moving, like if you've ever made a snowman and you have that really, really big snowball at the bottom, right? You can't just shove it really hard in one place because it's going to break apart. You have to like get lots of different positions on it to kind of move it slowly. Organizations are like that, right? You have to go find, okay, who are the 7 or 8 tastemakers in that team and like over here and this sort of stuff. And you get them bought in and they bring their teams with them. So like that kind of credibility and that kind of sophisticated organizational understanding, I think is absolutely critical. I think I will call out, I think it's really interesting. And I'm interested if you've had this experience, because a lot of my background is in building products. And one of the things that's the hardest for software developers to do is to understand how someone's going to use their technology, right? And so what we've done a lot in the operations roles I've been in is actually had developers go and sit next to the people who are doing the stuff with their software, so they can just literally I don't even need you two to talk. I just need you can hear the clickety clack of their keyboard and how many times they swear, and something osmosis wise is going to happen here. But it took a lot of time to break that down with the developers, where a lot of time they were just like, well, I don't want to do that. And I've got my comfortable setup here. I've got multiple monitors, that kind of thing. And so sitting down with people and being like, this is important that you understand how the rest of the business works. I'm super curious when you're coaching, if you've done this in your career, when you're coaching like a more junior person and they're like, the business doesn't understand. Have you ever had like allowed somebody to sort of see the light? Was there a road to Damascus moment that you participated in with one of the folks on the IT team when they finally saw, the business is totally different than I thought? Has that ever happened to you?
No example really comes immediately to mind, but if you take some of the actions that we're talking about, you kind of license them to go do it, right? So it's not considered to be such a strange, weird. If they think it's weird that you want to come, it's like triply weird if like a VP wants to go over. In some cases, at a director level, they should be out in the, talking to the business more. I mean, that's really kind of part of if you're in application support, I mean, the people using the applications are business people. So, you should do more than just process change requests that are coming in from that side of the world. The other, let's talk a bit about that for a minute too. The world has changed. In the SaaS world we find ourselves today, the different functional departments go out and buy a lot of best of breed products, and they typically don't come back to IT for changes to those products. They're mostly interested in integration, things talking to each other, data integrity issues, maybe security concerns or something like that. So this problem has gone away. But in organizations, let's say you had a large ERP system and you're still building customizations for the system, a lot of those requests that come in are from the super users of the IT resources, not from the average person. And the problems that the average person has, the super user intuitively can sidestep them or has already come up with a solution. So you find yourself building things and devoting time and energy to things that are edge cases for all intents and purposes, like a one customer kind of problem. Okay, it's a big customer, or this is really humbling and rarely performed. You build something, a customization, you send it out to the field, and then you go back and if anybody takes a look, a year later, it's hardly being used at all.
Exactly.
But at the time, it's supposed to be we got to have. Now, product managers encounter this all the time, right? So there's new features that are put in all the time, and companies come back and go well, we prioritize that over a lot of other things, but guess what? We have 100,000 customers, 2,000 have activated that feature. So was that really the best use of our resources? Internal IT departments don't really look at it from the same way, because what's their measure of success is if they kept the super user happy. So the super user says, oh, this is great. This edge case will never bother me again. So I'm taking care of. So you have to be, if you spend time out in the organizations that you're supporting, you can separate some of those kind of super user edge case concerns from what's really affecting the vast majority of the people in the function. So
just to dovetail on that, and then I want to shift over to talking about a couple of things. Like that same thing happens when you're thinking about it in terms of product development. We end up having personae that are like, specific, like, okay, these users, and like depending on where you work, you might even know, like, this is Jen and she loves to go to the beach and she hangs out, whatever your personas consist of. But it's very much an attempt to break down exactly that, which is you end up with this Pareto curve of a significant amount of your product usage is done by people who want to do one or two things and they just want to get them done and get out. And then there's this very, very like long tail of like, I use your product for everything, and I've discovered new ways to do stuff that you never even thought of, that kind of thing. And you've got to make sure that you're kind of keeping both constituencies happy and don't cross the streams, because you run afoul of like, oh, well, we got a case of the clevers. We released a feature and spent millions of dollars and like nobody touched it. Not that I've ever been associated with anything like that, but like it has happened in the history of software development. So pivoting perhaps like ungraciously, but like or gracefully. So AI right now is like all the rage. Like you cannot swing a dead cat without hitting an AI company. You cannot like there's just the badrillions of dollars of VC money pouring into here. And so I'm kind of curious, because you have a perspective. Is this period of change, you think, the last year or two, more profound than some of the other big times? Because this isn't the first time that Silicon Valley's been at this particular rodeo. We had the internet boom, we had a .com thing that happened. We even if you want to back up a little bit more, the microprocessor revolution, this sort of stuff. I'm kind of curious, as you think about it, is the AI sort of motion that we're seeing now unique or different from your perspective?
So once again, two things can be true at the same time, in the sense that you could look at this through one looking glass and tell yourself that this is just one new technology. We could rattle them all off: cloud computing, SaaS revolution, mobile phones, whatever. And that's changed the way work gets performed today. And this is just, the hype curve is high right now for a lot of different reasons, but we look back on this in 2 or 3 years, we'll just say, hey, it was like the post RPA world. And then we got crazy.
Irrational exuberance, and let's write it off. Sure. Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's face it. If quantum came along tomorrow, we wouldn't even be talking about AI anymore. That would be like completely off the table. That would become a hobby that some crazy data science people were like playing with at the back room, and we'd be all on like quantum computing. But so that's one perspective. The other perspective is, like, when I think a little more fundamentally about a lot of business processes, if you think about the historical constraints on the way business processes are formulated, and we just have lived this for so long that we don't even think about them consciously as constraints, or maybe some people, maybe we do to some extent. So the first constraint is always just bandwidth, people and time, like, can we get the right people with enough time to go and do something that we think is valuable? One. Two, and this is what IT's been about forever, can we bring the right information to the right place at the right time to do the right thing? Like, and one of the problems there is, like, we're really good at acquiring data and storing data, but pulling that together in the form of information, and then we have like timing constraints. And what I mean by that is, like, things happen at unpredictable times that happen. So if you really think about this with AI and an agentic workplace of the future, where there may be hundreds or more agents that all have capabilities, so there's no like time of day consideration or time of year or whatever. The virtual workforce is effectively infinite. There's no real capacity problem to work on it anymore. And in principle, you can mobilize 99% of the right information to be at that point of engagement where you have to decide to do something at the same time. So, it just, although the focus today is primarily on automation, and I get that. And you've got to build a business case. You've got to show ROI. So you've got to be able to show, hey, if we do this, customer sat's going to go up. Warehouse Inventory turnover will increase. We can do it with fewer people, whatever the result is at the end of the day. It's all on automation. That's how you justify a business case today. And I think, and maybe it takes a startup to come along and actually redesign the business process from scratch, because existing businesses, especially large enterprises, it would be so difficult for them to do. The one place where I think we've started to see this in our IT kind of world, or high tech world, is in the go-to-market activities of a lot of software companies, where a lot of the traditional roles and the way prospects were discovered and handled and cultivated and blah blah. Well, you and I could get on a video today and go have a personalized demo for our company with our data online, negotiate pricing, and buy something, like within 2 hours, hour and a half. And I mean a major thing. I don't mean like a little productivity toy. So yes. So in that sense, I know I'm being a little long-winded on you here, but I think that is a very much more fundamental thing. And we've kind of put it in the same box as like RPA and no-code platforms, all that other stuff, which again, the payoff was primarily an automation kind of a benefit.
It seems like just to drill in on the thing that you said, like when we think about going from automation's a very easy business case to articulate, but it's sort of scratching the surface of the potential of this technology. The thing that you were really articulating, it seems to me, is like, hey, I can actually, if I understand the real costs and benefits of these components in my business, I can move things around. So the ability to say, like, I can expand capacity dramatically and elastically is a thing. But in order to do that, I'd actually have to really understand how my business works. One of the things I think is so interesting is, like, if you look at where AI is being successful right now, it's places where we actually really understood what the process was. Like an SDR sales funnel is like one of the most studied and understood kind of things in the history of humankind, right? Like outbound marketing is like and it's not like you can just say like, oh, it's cookie cutter and you can just do the same thing. But the process portion of it is understood well enough, I think, that sliding AI in and being like, hey, we know where we can put the AI and put the humans seems like a little bit more understood than in, say, they're trying it with software development. We'll see if it works out. But it seems like understanding your business processes is sort of a prerequisite for really being able to achieve any of this. It seems to me.
Thanks. So wait, I want to blow your mind. Okay, let's give it another example that maybe illustrates this kind of more revolutionary capability that AI has. And so I'm doing some writing about this right now. Everybody's familiar with IT service desk and what an IT service desk does. It is instinctively and genetically a reactive kind of a tool. And in 2 ways. Obviously, the employees are all flooding the desk with all of their problems. Okay. And the vast landscape of IT systems and services that, you say grace over is much more complex and dynamic than it has ever been in the past. And IT barely controls half of it these days or less. So the whole desk is built on this idea of how quickly can we understand your problem and get it fixed and move on to solve the next problem, right? So what if the desk was turned upside down and you thought of it as more of a proactive mechanism to either spot conditions that could trigger a problem or detect an emerging problem and auto-correct it before a user was actually materially impacted at the end of the day. So, you think about like a security operations center trying to avoid data loss. Well, what if the service desk was there to avoid productivity loss?
Yeah. No, I love the idea. And just to riff on that for just a second, one of the things I think there's, and I think people will crack the code on this, and I'm not saying that my company might be like lined right up to do some of this, but to say, looking at things like, hey, we understand classes of issues and sort of the chain of causality because we've seen enough data to be able to say, okay, fair enough. One person on this team just filed this ticket. Let's not wait for it to become 7. Let's go out there and just proactively do the necessary things, fix it, and also let the team know that we're on it beforehand, right? That's the thing. Also, can I detect, if you go to a website right now, like a commercial website, and you start getting frustrated and you start clicking around, that's called rage clicking. And there are libraries that can detect that. right? And so why is it that I can't have that on my laptop where it's like, hey, my laptop can detect that I am starting to rage click because I'm getting that spinning beach ball on my Mac, and having someone in the IT team just notified right then, something's starting to suck for this person, get after it, right? Like those things I think that is a new and interesting frontier as a thing to get more proactive as a thing, which is
But again,
kind of,
these are all good examples of things that we've never done before because of the constraints that I talked about earlier.
yeah. Well, and so there, I think the piece of that is more difficult, right, is you're an IT leader. And I'll say this, but I'm interested if you have a different perspective, because I think you'll be more skillful at sort of diagnosing this. But one of the things I think IT leaders run into in that case is that like selling better is hard. Right.
Yes.
Selling better is just a really, really difficult thing. And the thing that's funny is like, and we you and I've talked about this before, but there's basically studies that say that happier employees sell 30% more stuff. Right. And so like going to a CRO and saying like, hey, I can increase your sales by 30%. No CEO in the world would say no to that, unless you show up and say the reason is because they're happier at work because their tech doesn't suck. And then they're like, I can't go there with you. You know what I mean? So I am actually super curious about that. Like when you think about building these business cases and stuff like this, I guess like you've got to figure out how to like weaponize that lost productivity. Is that sort of the angle that we'd have to go after?
Yeah, that's like actually a good term, because look at the security guys. That's what they do. We have no meaningful measurements of the efficacy of different security tools. I mean, I can't tell you right now, if I was in an operational role, that I am 96.5% sure that like they can't get in, like nothing bad could ever happen. Okay, so I've got like 3.5% of risk that's hanging out there. And if I come in and say, there's a new $2 million tool that I want to defend against XYZ, I can't tell you if I had that tool, I can go to 98.5. I can shut down half of my remaining risk, and that's the return on the investment. So it's kind of like buying insurance. Like how much insurance do you think you need, and how do you think of the cost benefit of like more or less insurance? And so productivity arguments get into that same kind of a realm, because they're really justified on the basis of time savings, but there's no way anybody knows how time savings are translated into improved productivity unless you start firing people. That's
Yeah.
like
Or,
the
yeah.
meaningful metric. Yeah.
100%. Or and if you say like I have fixed this upstream problem, so the problem didn't happen, being able to represent that as this is actually what I saved you is really, really difficult, because then you're like, okay, well, my made up number is bigger than your made up number, that kind of thing. Although Douglas Hubbard would argue with you on there's no good way to measure this sort of thing, author of How to Measure Everything in Cybersecurity Advanced. But that's neither here nor there. I think there's a lot of this is a place where I think, once, the machine learning folks, conquer, large language models, there's a lot of, I think, room in sort of Bayesian statistics and stuff like this to be able to model more effectively this class of thing, right? Because we have enough ticket data to be able to say, look, in an organization your size, this is about how many issues you tend to have, right? This is about how much time it takes to, and so there shouldn't be at least in, I have a little bit of a math background, like there shouldn't be a reason why I couldn't do it. The big issue is I think like IT leaders don't have the time and don't have the background and don't have the tool set to like make those cases. And so then they're left with like, okay, well, I'm hoping that, I can justify this by firing 3 people, which is just a terrible flinty-eyed capitalist way to do everything, right? It's just like, and at the end of it, we're firing people. It's just always, kind of a thing. So I am super kind of curious when you're thinking about, you mentioned things have changed with SaaS, and like IT team is no longer the central point for all technology in an organization. You have plenty of things where like the sales teams run in Salesforce themselves, and like these people are doing this and they've got their own product planning tool or whatever. We have customers, that have more SaaS applications than they have employees, as just a pretty standard thing, right? So with AI though, is this an opportunity for IT to kind of come back into the fore, or do we think that belongs somewhere else in the organization? Because like I'm looking at this going like, I don't think most organizations want to have like, oh, well, we have some people using, ChatGPT and some people using Gemini and some people, and this kind of thing, and we have no idea where our data is and that sort of stuff. What's the role of the CIO and the IT team if we were doing an AI transformation well? Like in your mind's eye, what would that look like?
Question that's on everybody's mind.
Yeah.
So I think the primary role let me preface this by saying, obviously the CIO can't go out and say, oh, I just stumbled across this company and they've got like a native AI based supply chain solution. And I'm going to come over to the procurement guys and say, I think this could really, well, I could do that. I could go and say, this is
Like you
interesting.
can't show up and say, I bought this, enjoy.
I bought
right?
it for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas. I got this for you. So no, that doesn't really happen anymore at all. Um, but let's just play that one out. But beyond just saying, oh, I went to Palo Alto and I found some really cool companies and I came back with that. I mean, what's 10 times more significant is to find either a competitor or somebody in another industry that also has a large warehousing operation or retail stores or whatever. And like, wow, I found out they're getting some mileage out of this. Like, this is I'm not saying it's cool technology. It probably is cool technology. I'm saying it's got a real business traction in this other place, right? So then the people's ears kind of perk up. So that's some form of leadership or innovation inspiration. Let's call that innovation inspiration.
I like it. I like it.
Like that. Where I think IT can have some of the biggest impact from a leadership perspective is to really have an understanding of the gotchas that are out there, right, in using this. And I mean, all the list. How is company data being used and potentially exposed? Are we training other people's models on some of the key processes, how we do strategic analysis?
Sure.
If we have a 10-person multifunction strategy analysis team to map out what we're doing for the next 3 years, and we pepper this thing with questions and alternative scenarios and whatever, and then one of our competitors uses the same model, Claude's a lot smarter probably now about like how to think through a problem of our strategic plan for the next years. So how is that happening? How does it make mistakes? Like, do we really understand how this thing needs to be monitored over time? It's great to turn it on, but who's going to mind the store? Is that a new staffing requirement? How are we going to explain some of the things that are going on there? And being IT, I think you'll readily appreciate this. Sooner or later, somebody's going to say, how come we're spending so much money on this stuff, right? And so then there's going to be some interesting conversations not at a C level, but below about the size of context windows and response latency and, where the data came from, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the gotchas. And that's not even a complete list, but to kind of help the business people think through, I can think of another good example off the top of my head. Do we, in certain situations or applications, do we have data of sufficient volume and integrity that we can actually use this AI tool meaningfully in our business, right? Because here's a great example, churn analysis in a startup company. Guess what? There's a lot of anecdotal information about like why we lost a sale to another customer, but there's not like a whole lot of really good, real data.
You have to eat that 6 or 10 rows in a spreadsheet until it tells you whatever you want it to tell you.
Exactly. So, sure, we could go off and buy a AI native tool for churn analysis, but I'm telling you right now, it's kind of, we're chasing our tail. It's crazy. So it's a classic thing where in the old days, you would have said, well, if you're going to go buy that, you need to talk to our enterprise architect to see if it meets our standards and fits in, et cetera. I think instead of being the policeman of sorts, this is, offer a helping hand to naive and say, let's just kind of think through some of this stuff before we just lunge off yet.
And so like, I'm curious, like, it seems to me like a successful like IT organization, a medium-sized company is probably going to need to develop and dedicate some time and resources to getting smart on these tools themselves. So that is to say, like, there's probably some positions where you're either taking a couple of your app people and saying, hey, you're going to 2 or 3 conferences and taking a class or getting certified or whatever it happens to be. By the way, we need to wise up on this versus, you've done it in your spare time kind of a thing. It's going to become some full-time jobs is the thing.
Yep.
I want to ask, I've got 2 more questions for you. And by the way, thank you so much for taking all the time. The first one is like, and this was something you and I have talked about a couple of times, and it's a topic that's a little bit like, my crystal ball is very fuzzy, as is everybody else's, but I'm just super interested in this narrative in AI, that AI is going to remove all the entry-level jobs. And we're going to be left with like 8 really senior people at every company. Like every Fortune 500 company is going to be reduced to like 12 people, right? And then a whole bunch of bots. And if that's the case, like, one, I'm super mad. I'm super interested in how we imagine the IT team of the future being shaped. But two, what do you think of that narrative? Like, how do you think that plays out? Does that seem like, kind of where it's going from your perspective? And I'll fully stipulate that your crystal ball may be as foggy as everybody else's, but I'm just interested in how do you think about that? Like the sort of the death of the entry level, job and this sort of stuff. Because last I checked, we all had entry level jobs at one point. I'm just curious.
What's a good synonym for fake news when it comes to like a fake issue? Maybe that's it, a fake issue.
Yeah.
So here's the way I think about this. I think the entry-level jobs in 2025 are completely different from the entry-level jobs in 2015, which were completely different from the entry-level jobs in 2005. And people that whine about the loss of the entry-level jobs are old and ossified in their thinking. And the only way they can think about an entry-level job is based on the entry-level job that they had.
Okay, got it. All right. Yeah.
Right. So they can think, oh crap, nobody's going to want to do that kind of thing anymore. That's what I did 30 years and 20 years ago. So what you really don't see a lot written or speculated about this. Maybe Gartner's run off and done it, but like, what would an entry level job look like in the future, right? Like is there going to be an inference analyst on that, that looks into how did it decide to buy that or that warehouse at that point in time? Like, why? What was the chain of thought that led to that? And was there any kind of like a panel of experts evaluation that said, well, that's pretty valuable warehouse space. If we go by that, that means that there's no space left over to buy other stuff, which might be in more demand, which would be the higher profit, right? So was it too myopic in the way of, so I think though there will be, and once, if you came out of college and you understood the inference process, that the way it works, then you would sit there and start to ask questions. Yeah, why did it make that decision? I don't understand why we did that. What if we gave it different? Yeah. So anyway, I think it's a failure on the part of people to go through the intellectual exercise to try to understand or speculate what an entry-level job would look like, in the future.
It's fascinating. I think one thing, it just sort of stitches together a couple of the things that we've talked about, which is this idea that this general shift away from some of the doing of the work to the quality assurance of the work, right? This idea that like where people are actually going to end up being like, and like I've been seeing this, like we see this at Fixify candidly, is like a lot of times what's ending up happening is we're spending a lot of time saying like, okay, somebody needs to check the output of the AI versus having done the AI piece, because in reality, like, they do hallucinate, they do have stuff. So the cost structure of a lot of these things, I think, is going to shift a bunch to, people are much more rather than being on the assembly line, they're at the end of the assembly line now. They're checking the pieces as they come off, kind of a thing, which is, I think, one, I find the perspective very comforting, because I have been a little glooming and dooming it, if I'm being honest, and so, the idea that there will be jobs that'll just look very different, and people will take their flying cars to them, is a good deal.
It's not just quality control, because it does go to the heart of some of the trade-offs we talked about before. So if you think of a network of agents that are supporting any given function, what is the optimum kind of number, and then the scope and skills of that agent network? And as the business changes, how would you modify that network? And if new data is available to you, like how should they operate differently? So it's not just like a static thing. Like the quality control is like, how did we get to that diagnosis that led to that autonomous action, if you allow it to take the autonomous action? So that's all true. But then, like you've got a network of agents, and how are they actually talking to each other? I mean, do you develop a concern where you say, why did that agent share that information with this agent in like marketing? I don't understand. Why would that have ever happened? Do I want that to ever happen in the future? So yeah, I think, I think somebody maybe calls it like an orchestrator role, but it's like a network engineering role, the same way you'd optimize the performance of any network of,
It could be, although one of the things I think about, and I don't know how you think about this, is like, so a network engineering view of that is sort of thinking about the connections in there, I think are the critical thing. And I think that totally makes sense as a viewpoint. There's another piece though, which is like, I think that when you think about a team, any team in 5 years, 10 years, and it's a cyborgian construct of some people and some bots, and like those bots are interacting with each other, and they might be interacting with people and that sort of stuff. That's very much a management function, like designing what that looks like, designing those things. And so one of the things I do think about sometimes is like, what is the management job of 5 years from now. And some of it may well be that sort of like, oh, okay, this complex of stuff, this sort of organization is going to be 27 bots stitched together like this and 4 people, right? You know, that kind of thing. And so, you know, as a general thing, I think there's an interesting thing of like which job becomes what as we morph into it as a thing.
Let's follow up on that. So there is another interesting analogy to API management. So in API management, you've got the clumpers and the splitters. So the splitters think that API should be very, very narrow in scope, only able to do certain kinds of things. Developers think, well, that just makes more work for me. What if we just clumped a whole lot of functionality into like a mother API, and then I have like,
yeah, exactly, yeah,
right. You know, or you'll go down that same alley with agents. Like how functional should a specific agent, in terms of like also reuse in different processes, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, you know, there'll be ample opportunities for new jobs to appear that are trying to improve the effectiveness of this swarm that'll be created. Yep.
All right. So final wrap up question, like what's one resource? It could be a book, a blog, a podcast or something like this that you'd recommend to folks to get smart or stay smart on IT. What's your go-to?
Okay. So this is a softball question because I have published 2 books. If somebody's listening to this, based on what we've talked about today, I'd suggest the first book called Truth from the Trenches. But I'm going to actually spice this up a little bit. I want to suggest a weekly newsletter that I've become addicted to. And I get a lot of newsletters. And frankly, a lot of times I kind of dread them because I figure, well, there's probably a needle in the haystack there, but I got to take the time to like open it and read the whole thing and get to it. But there is a partner at Decibel. So Decibel. And her name is Jess Liao or Leo, Leao. And if you go to her LinkedIn profile, you can sign up for the Substack blog, which she publishes every weekend. And she has one of the cheekiest weekly reviews of new developments in AI that I have found anywhere. And it's not just the content, right? Because we could all go into different places and say, what are the new foundational models that came out? And like, you know, how are the big boys, you know, trying to blunt each other, et cetera, et cetera. But she gets into some of the politics and implications of like what's going on in the world of AI, which I find to be very insightful and thoroughly entertaining. So it's one of the few newsletters, especially weekly newsletters, that I look forward to every weekend to kind of open up and see what she's gonna worry about.
Very cool. And, you know, they also happen to be an investor. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Mark. Thank you so much for visiting with us and sharing some of your insight. Really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. Yep. Good seeing you. Take care.